Member for Thong Lim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Many of the problems we seek to address in this House will take time and patience. They will also require cooperation and a better shared understanding of the underlying dynamics of the problems. With that in mind, I rise tonight to speak a little bit more about our population growth, about our demographic decline and our loss of human capital in recent years. When I grew up here, and indeed when I left university interstate, I honestly believed by the time I returned here, there'd be 500,000 people, we'd be a state, and there'd be a David Jones and a Myer. That was, what I had been told for time immemorial. And it is sad collectively for all of us that things have gone backwards. And one of the reasons things have gone backwards is that we have dropped the ball on cultivating and securing and prioritising our human capital. And as you will have heard, it's part of the reason why I returned here to see if I could help in earnest to help us with skilled migration and population growth. And I am encouraged that some of these bigger picture issues may have the possibility of being addressed by the new government. I'm not here to politicise the facts tonight. I just want to put some information on the record for the benefit of everyone in the House, because these are discussions we'll return to in different ways, and I think it's useful for us to have a shared frame of reference. Our population growth over the last 40 years is wildly differential, and in the pre-2000 period, the Northern Territory used to outpace the rest of the country on population growth. And then from about 2012 onwards, it starts to fall quite dramatically. And years ago, Arthur Caldwell, an Immigration Minister, popularised the phrase populate or perish. And that's honestly not dissimilar to where we are now, in my opinion. We are actually in real terms declining in terms of population and viable workforce, and it affects all the areas that we want to work in and all of the services that we want to provide. And it matters because, as the Tercey report from 2020 stated, quote unquote, until there is a significantly larger population, the Territory will continue to rely on interstate and overseas migration to fill jobs. Now, our overseas migration stocks over the last 40 years have also been wildly differential. And why it matters is that overseas migration has become very low, and if population growth is a goal, we have to start thinking about how to attract, retain and develop migrants from overseas, because Australia's immigration policy is its de facto population policy. So says the Productivity Commission for years and years and years. What about the other components of population? Natural increase, which is births minus deaths, and interstate migrants. Well, the thing is, there was a time in the last 20 years when everyone was growing less but still growing. But the most salient part of that picture is net interstate migration, which has been negative for a very, very long time in the Northern Territory. And it's our resting state, essentially. And so we have to think about how to mitigate that, because we can't turn it around overnight. But if we actually want to be able to populate the Northern Territory with a skilled workforce to support all of the areas we want to support, we have to start understanding that actually there is no other way to do it other than to look to overseas skilled people. So we've got to provide the right conditions here for them to come back to. Now, a lot of times people think that in the last 10 years, things were significantly better in periods that correlated with our gas boom, as it were. But what you'll actually find, and this is not drawing a causal relationship or a correlative one, you'll just find that in that period of time, actually, our population stocks get even worse. And our net interstate migration is even lower. And that's because we start to create substitute capacity in our economy by having so much FIFO work, having so much agency workforce, and relying on temporary migration mechanisms in place of permanent migration mechanisms. And we'll have to band together if we're going to change that story. If we turn this into a political football as well, there'll be no one left to work in the Northern Territory, to live in the Northern Territory, to grow the Northern Territory. If you look at the Treasury data, what you'll see is that negative interstate migration has been our resting state, and that our population growth is trending downwards on every metric. And so, you know, Treasury was hoping it'd be 1.1%, and then it turned out to be 0.9%, and now it's 0.8% year on year. And Deloitte Access Economics, you know, who are the most bullish forecasters, will tell you it needs to be somewhere around 1.4%. But for us to get anywhere near 300,000 people in this place, we have to grow at in excess of 2.5% population growth. And that means we have to do some things radically differently, and we're going to have to cooperate, or this will get gridlocked and there's just not going to be enough Territorians to make the territory realise its potential. Charles Darwin University has done some good work on this, and I would urge you to look at the work done by Professor Andrew Taylor, who has pointed out that our periods of positive interstate migration correlate with when we build things. So in the early 80s, when we were building new suburbs like Karama and Palmerston and the then Northern Territory University, or again in the mid-90s, when we were building Cullen Bay, which created headroom in the market for people to move up and on, or again, in fact, when we had projects like ConocoPhillips, where we prioritise OPEX and CAPEX expenditure in the same place, we are able to actually grow our economy and grow our population at the same time. And those are the periods where we have positive interstate migration. The last time we actually had it was for a perverse reason, a bunch of Canberra bureaucrats here because of the Northern Territory intervention. So if we really want to grow our population, we have to start thinking about how to make this an attractive place in every regard, and we are trying in different ways to create those conditions. But we will need to work together on this. It's important to understand this wasn't how it always was, though. In the 80s, we were growing at 30%. Population growth elapsed over the decade. And in the 90s and 2000s, 20% population growth. These are rough figures. It's only in the last decade that the economic policy choices that have been made by actually both sides of governance have resulted in us having less than 5% population growth. And that's a failure of economic policy. And I am genuinely proud to be part of this government, which is facing up to this reality at least, creating ministries to look at this seriously, and these issues are being taken seriously. And I don't want to politicise this, but the last government was not interested in facing the reality of our demographic decline. There was willful blindness about it, and it was a serious problem, and it's part of the reason why none of these projects have gotten off the ground, because we frankly just don't have the workforce to support them. Migration isn't a substitute for investing in the skills of Australians, but if you look at the Australian Government White Paper on Jobs and Opportunities, you'll see it's said like 10 times over that, you know, well-targeted migration can complement local skills while contributing to productivity growth. And that's why it's really important for us to have a sensible discussion in the Northern Territory, where we all love and care about Luxor festivals and multiculturalism, to actually genuinely invest in multiculturalism when it comes to migration, you know, and welcoming people, laying out the welcome mat, integrating them, settling them, you know, actually making them long-term Territorians. And our plans to create new housing supply are really important in that regard, because even if you can find all the people in the world, where are you going to put them? So we really do need to create housing stock, and we are incentivising new supply, and that's a critical part of this as well. I mean, I could go on about this for a very long time, but I just wanted to put some of the foundational data down tonight so that we might have a think about it collectively going forward, noting that this is a discussion that is going to come up in lots of forms, I imagine, over the coming months. But we know that for overseas migrants, interstate migrants and Territorians, different things have to be addressed when we look at the diagnosis of the situation and what needs to be done to attract, retain and develop our population. And the single most important metric when it comes to overseas migrants and attracting them is the lure of permanency and permanent residency. So we want to get the right people here, and then we want to make sure to retain them that we settle them, and then we want to make sure that to develop them, we integrate them. And when it comes to interstate migrants, we know that livability, opportunity and upward mobility are the most important things. If you can't provide a better deal here than elsewhere, people will go back down interstate. And finally, for Territorians, we need to reinforce our existing population, because unless we can improve lifestyle and provide opportunities for growth, there aren't salient reasons to stick around. So, members of the House and Madam Speaker, I appreciate your indulgence at the end of a very long day and fortnight on these issues. I sincerely hope we can work together on sustainable population growth to underpin sustainable economic growth for the benefit of all Northern Territorians. Thank you.
Member for